First, just to introduce our team. I have my son Byron here. Tom Lynch is here. Tom was the construction manager and knows the project intimately. He was up there representing Mr. Freeman during the construction. Our contractor, general contractor, is a 20-year client friend, John Pedalino, who's very involved in building in the valley. And behind me is Finn Cappy, Ray Cappy's son, who has handled the bulk of the design with his father and can speak to that design. Just to comment on the fence, it is the intent to hide that fence. We do not want to have that fence up and over boulders. If we could keep it in a very circuitous way to avoid that and still meet that 5-foot requirement, that's the intent. It was clear from Architectural Advisory Committee that we didn't hit it right on the first submittal because we had more of a rectangular layout. And so the plan that we have now is intended to be more of an organic look so that we can hide that fence and still provide the safety that we need to. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Finn Cappy, who can kind of walk through the architecture and answer any specific architectural questions that you have. So we're here, and we would appreciate approval today. There was nothing in the conditions of approval that we're troubled by, so thank you, Ken, for that work, and thank you for your time today. Thank
you. Good afternoon. I'm Finn Cappy, and my dad, Ray, would have been here himself. He sends his regards. He's 90, going to be 91 in August, and not traveling much, so you're going to have to put up with me for this afternoon, and I hope that's satisfactory. We met Ed Freeman 3 years ago and came out to Desert Palisades, and we were both thoroughly impressed with the kind of development that we could tell was going on out there. And to whatever degree the planning department was involved in that development, we commend you on that. It had a feeling right away about the open space and the easements between lots that we really wanted to capitalize when it came time to working with Bob and his sons on this house. So I don't know if you have any questions per se, but I just wanted to repeat, or I don't know that you need me to walk you through the program again, other than the big picture is that we like responding to natural features in the landscape. And so the sloping of the Chino Cone, and you've noticed the ravine that goes through, the subtle ravine that goes through the middle of the site. We opened up and bridged that with the house and kind of tried to reinforce that with the idea of a spillway from the jacuzzi into the main pool, and then from the main pool into a capturing reservoir that's right at the head of the ravine as it outlets the property. So to go back to this pool barrier issue, which is tricky, and it's obvious why it gets everybody's attention. The last thing we want to do is sort of have that feature become a defining element in this sort of open space environment of the wonderful Desert Palisades development. So we feel we have a strategy that can navigate the boulders and the landscape and keep from being obvious and keep from defining property line. And it's interesting, because you can measure it from the downhill side, that means you can keep it even lower from where the house side is. And the other thing we're happy about, as Ken pointed out, is that that pool barrier starts way away from the street view. So it's down and away from any primary view from the street. So we're optimistic that we can make it work out and not be a problem and not enclose the nice patio areas, which are the other thing that the ownership was committed to not doing and spending more money, by the way, to do this kind of pool barrier, which is further away from the house. If you have any questions, be glad to try to answer them.
Questions of the architect or applicant? Commissioner Wood.
Can you tell me, is this a spec house that you're doing in collaboration, or is this a home that one of the two of you will be living in?
This is a spec house for Bob Smith and his sons. We're only doing the architectural part of it.
if we added a condition that said something like pool perimeter fencing shall be between and around the boulders versus on top of the boulders, would you be opposed to that?
I wouldn't be, would you? No, that's exactly our intention, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The concrete in the driveway entry, that's permeable?
We have some breaks between the concrete pads, but the spec on the concrete is not permeable at this time. We have an exposed aggregate, and we have a color to match.
Ken, don't the conditions require permeable concrete?
Yeah, I'll let him finish his comment, and then I was going to clarify the section of the staff report that points to that.
Yeah.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm looking at you to clarify this, I believe that most of the flat work, except where it's suspended, is permeable. That was my understanding. And the areas around the pool deck and areas where you had to put in reinforcing steel was not permeable. Is that the correct clarification?
We're fine with that. Yeah. We're fine with that.
That's as I understood it.
So,
Madam
just
Chair?
in terms of the answer, then, the concrete near the garages, the entry, is permeable.
That's correct. And I would point out in your staff report on page 12, item 4, that's the text out of the ordinance that talks about driveway material. It notes that permeable surfaces, concrete, gravel, pavers, precast, recycled concrete are encouraged. No asphalt, color to blend, and that is what we've since conditioned and what they have proposed now, rather than it being a natural gray finish, but that it's a pigmented concrete that will blend in more with the color of the...
And that's only the driveway area. We're not making any requirements on the other areas.
I understood it was all, but I'll let the applicant clarify that.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, currently, that was our proposal, was to make a transition when we got to the house, so that there was the colored adobe Davis, I think it is, adobe that matches the roadway edges, and then we were going to make a transition as you entered the house and to the backyard area where it doesn't have that relationship, and arguably natural gray concrete may, as in the rendering here, match into the natural boulder topography as well as any other color can.
I'm very comfortable with that, and I'm seeing one of our architects concur. I think those are my questions. I know that the AAC loved this. I'm excited to see this get built. Are there other questions of the applicant? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And at this point, it's before the commission. Commissioner Hudson.
I guess I'll kick it off here. First of all, when I saw this submittal, when I saw the name Cappy on the title block, I got very excited. Ray Cappy's work, obviously, has been very influential to me over the years, over the decades, and to see his son involved in this project is a good thing for Palm Springs. The design of the house, to simplify my comments, is just wonderful. I think it totally responds to the site. It relates to the landscape in a very, very sophisticated way. And unlike some of the houses we've seen recently, it has a lightness, it has an elegance to it, and it has just a sort of confident simplicity to it. I'm just a huge fan. In terms of the board-formed concrete, and with the comments that were just made about the driveway pad immediately outside the garage doors, I totally agree that that should be the gray concrete, so that all of these terraces, the pool surround, the steps going down to the fire pit, it's all one family of concrete and dealt with very unapologetically. My question to Ken pertaining to the landscape, it's a broader issue, I think. Right now we've got planned just a handful of houses up there, and the desert still remains just primal and very, very simple. But knowing in the future that each one of these pads will have a house, I guess my concern is that privacy between houses, over houses, will become an issue over the years. Obviously, the first houses sort of have the advantage of being the first kids on the block, but I could see in the future that becomes problems with heights of trees and so forth, with preservation of views. So that's more of a comment that's, you know, global to the entire Desert Palisades community. But in many ways, that's sort of a niggling point. I think this project follows the guidelines, the specific plan of Desert Palisades. It's probably the best I've seen yet. And I wholeheartedly support this project.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion to approve with the staff conditions.
And I also understood Commissioner Woods wanted a condition added that the pool fencing is to be coordinated and worked around the boulders rather than up and over.
It's acceptable as part of the motion.
And there was also a condition that the concrete going toward the driveway be permeable and match the palette of the street to some extent. The back concrete, that had come out of AAC.
Well, I tend to disagree here. Ken, maybe if we could bring the image of the driveway up. But in my mind, I think that's probably good enough. From the street, there's 4 or 5 panels of sort of a long rectangle. And then there's the large pad immediately outside the garage doors and the carport. To me, what I was referring to is that large rectangle should be in the family, color-wise, of the natural gray concrete. It's my mind that it should not try to match the pavers of the roadways.
But the four small pads coming in, the 4 steps where it's broken?
Well,
I'm just going to the AAC recommendations on this.
Right. I understand what they were coming from, but let's just say that perhaps those 4 panels, 5 panels off the street are a transition zone and should reflect some coloration from the roadways. I'll leave it at that. I think, to be honest with you, I respect the AAC, but this is a really sophisticated house with a very sophisticated palette. Actually, this image on our screen now, I could say, okay, the lower part of the driveway adjacent to the planter, to the left of that planter, could be a color which coordinates with the pavers in the street more closely. And I think actually Mr. Cappy responded that they would be open to that sort of idea.
Mr. Cappy?
We studied it after the hearing with the AAC, and we felt that in that lower image, there's an edge color to the roadway up in Desert Palisades. That's it's not that different of a tone. It's just a little warmer and a little brown or redder, almost like the aerial of the mountain behind Commissioner Woods. So we felt that we could take that tone off the edging of the street and run it into about the garage door, or on the left, the back of the carport. And we were okay with that. We think it works pretty well with the palette of the house, if that is what is required. We're not against doing that, and then making the change at the house, and as you described, keeping the palette together all the way through the rest of the house and into the backyard area. So we're open to either one. We could take it to the garage door and that open carport and then stop it there, or if you'd like us to only do those 4 pads or 5 pads there from the street in and stop and make a change. I think we'd prefer to keep it one tone all the way to the door, one way or the other. That way it doesn't catch your eye. There's no transition. I guess I'd have to say we'd prefer the transition to happen at a point where you can't see 2 different colors at the same time, really.
Commissioner Hudson?
Wow. As an architect, I try to have things be very, have a sense and an order to them. And when you made the comment about all the other concrete pads and terraces and so forth around the house, I was seeing that this driveway perhaps could be part of that family. But if you feel comfortable having that, the edge tone of the roadway continue to the front of the garage doors and into the carport, I think that's a good compromise, or that's a good solution.
We were open to that. It's not such a severe, thank you, and I respect I can tell where your aesthetic's coming from, and we're close. That's why we showed it like this in the first place. But if yielding to the comment of trying to make a softer transition and not have it be such an urban looking concrete and finish, we took another look at it all and said, okay, we can yield to that and do something that works.
If I could comment on that exact same point without providing full comments. My only concern at all is that there is quite a bit of concrete both in the front and the back that's exposed out exterior to the house footprint. And it's highly visible. You're high up in the hill. You've chosen a lot that's high up in the hill. It's very visible from the valley floor. I would highly suggest not only that it be permeable, which I think we all agree on, but that it be as non-reflective as possible, because it will be reflectiveness at that high of a standpoint. The Mirage House, as an example, although it was highly reflective, was seen the valley over. Then concrete can do the same thing. Concrete can do the exact same thing. It can be highly reflective if it's gray concrete. And I don't think that it would take away from the aesthetic of the entire site if it wasn't reflective. If we chose a material that was as, what's the word I want, as least reflective as possible. Thank you.
It's still your motion.
I respect those comments a great deal. Looking at the site plan, I would have to say actually that in the backyard, all of these areas are used to great effect. I don't see any excess concrete. Likewise in the front, for the car driveway turnaround area, I think it's functionally what it needs to be. So I would like to keep the hardscape plan, the paving plan as is, as part of the approval.
So you had two conditions with the approval, which as is, but the fences and the front treatment.
Yes.
And that, do you have any other conditions that you were proposing?
I do not.
And the seconder of the motion is Commissioner Maruzzi. Do you accept both those conditions? Then that's what's in front of us. Are there any comments on this? Can we call the question?
Before we call the question,
Call the question.
Is there a second?
There was a second. This passes 6-0 with one absent. Congratulations. We're looking forward to seeing the house.
Thank you.
Does anyone need a break before the last item, or are we okay? Okay. Moving right along. Planning Commission discussion of the deferral of making appointments to the Architectural Advisory Committee when terms were set to expire on June 30th, 2018. Staff report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Planning Commission. So, as you will recall, the City Council deferred the appointment of two members to the Commission in one of their past meetings, and that is to defer the expiration dates of two planning commissioners. And since those actions were taken by the Planning Commission, we were asking the by the City Council, we're asking the Planning Commission to review taking the same action relative to the Architectural Advisory Committee, since it is the Planning Commission that appoints those members to that committee. There are two expiration coming up, that is that of the chair and the vice chair. That would have been by June 30th, but we're asking the Planning Commission to discuss deferring those two appointments so that by the time if they agree to stay till the ending of the year, which would be December of this year, that would allow the Planning Commission time to have an outreach, to have to be able to appoint two new members that will start serving from January of 2019. So we have the planning director has given you a memo outlining how that is supposed to be carried out. So what we're asking you to do today is to have a discussion relative to deferring those two appointments and give us directions. If it is your pleasure to defer those two appointments, by the next meeting, a resolution reflecting your decision will be presented to you for a formal action. That's basically what this discussion is about.
And I make a comment on this. It really came as a suggestion from both myself and Flynn. We're not required to do this. They did extend the terms of everybody who was terming out or needing to reapply for 6 months to allow, as the city goes through the district and civil rights action, to allow more time for recruitment, especially recruitment of minorities and women to commissions. So our thinking was that we should look at extending this to the two members of the AAC on a 6-month basis, and both of them have shorter terms, so they actually haven't served, I believe, a full 6 years. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, you're correct.
They both took other appointments for other people. And to be honest, we would lose all of the diversity we have on the AAC if we lost Maria. So it basically is what the pleasure of the commission is. One of the things we typically do on this commission has been to recruit members for the AAC, which hasn't been done this year, and it's how we've ended up with such a great AAC, is that members of our commission have gone out to speak to people they know to ask them to apply. So it gives us more time. Yes, Commissioner Dunford.
I would strongly recommend that we adopt the staff position and extend these 2 terms. Chairman Song has done a terrific job, and the fact they're willing to stay on, I think, is terrific, and it'll give us time to take a look at other possibilities, because when we've got more time and we spend time going into the communities, we do find good people. But when we're left at the last minute with having to come up with someone to meet one of the criterion, then we have a problem. So I think this is a great idea. We should extend them.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
I wasn't able to pull it up, but I thought the memo that we received from the city about the extension also pertained to the AAC. It did not.
No, it didn't pertain to the AAC or the Personnel Advisory Board. I think Personnel Advisory Board is appointed by a range of different entities, and the AAC is appointed by us. So council only took action on those bodies to which they make appointments.
So, okay.
And
so,
this is before us.
So does this, if this is adopted, would it mirror the same time frame as the council's?
It would mirror the same time frame as the council's.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Or I mean, at our pleasure, you probably could extend them. Yeah, yeah. It does mirror that. Pleasure.
Make a motion.
Yes.
I move to adopt the staff report and extend these 2 terms for 6 months with Maria Song and Kenny Cassidy.
Second.
And they have indicated that they would accept this. We've already reached out to them. So we have a motion and a second. Can you call the roll, please? Commissioner Hirschbein, would you vote? This passes 6-0 with 1 absent, and there will be a motion coming, or an official motion coming to us next time.
We will be drafting and bringing a formal resolution of the Planning Commission back to you in 2 weeks. And that will be the formal action to defer appointments of the AAC
Right.
until the end of the year.
But informally, we might tell them that we expect them to.
I think you could say that.
I think we could, yes. Okay, Planning Commissioner reports, requests, and comments. I have 1 or 2, just if anybody else has comments. We had a probably 10th and final meeting of the Golf Course Ordinance Subcommittee today, and we have finalized a draft that will be coming back to the full commission at our next meeting. We're feeling quite good about it. Staff did a great job, and our attorney helped with making sure that language conformed to city standards. We also have gone pretty far with the Plan Development District Subcommittee, and I think we've come close to a final draft. We are meeting next week with the original task force to go back over the changes to the ordinance that the subcommittee has proposed, and we are hoping we will bring both of those back. The third thing that we haven't brought back yet is the small lot subdivision. We're looking at possibly working in a slightly different direction than the work that had been done a couple of years ago. Looking at a suggestion from the planning director, which might simplify what we had looked at before, but we haven't finished that. But in terms of those 2 subcommittees that have been meeting, that's the report. The other thing is that the city did pass the budget. The budget includes, over this coming year, funds, and I don't know what shape that will take, but it does include funds for revisions and review of the land use element, the housing element, and the zoning code, comporting the zoning, bringing the zoning code up to date, and especially having it match the land use element, which it hasn't done for several decades. So that's work that's going to be done over the next year. We don't know how that's going to take shape yet, but Flynn will keep us up to date on that. Do we have a report from the other subcommittee that's met?
I can talk. Peter and I are serving on a joint task force with HSPB regarding handling the regulatory process for demolition and remodeling of properties, and talking about the ongoing inventory of historic properties, historically significant properties. We had a very good meeting, I'd say about 2 weeks ago, with the HSPB and our staff. Mr. Priest was there as well as Mr. Flynn. We're making good progress. We're going to see a draft, I think, next week that we'll begin working on. So I think we're going to be moving rather quickly to finalize this so that both bodies can consider it.
Great. Any other reports or requests? Can you give Edward, the planning director's report?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So first, I just want to bring to the attention of the Commission that today's meeting will be adjourned to June 27, and that meeting will be taking place at the Convention Center, and also that there will be a presentation on the downtown park. A presentation related to that downtown park will be made at that study session. And as requested earlier by the chair, by Madam Chair, we will be sending out packages of that presentation to members of the Planning Commission. Correct. So that will be done. And finally, I just want to urge members of the commission that when an item is on the agenda that, and when you have questions relative to fees, to please, if we can know ahead of time so that we can do some relative research, because we have to coordinate with other departments in order to get you the accurate fees that have been paid relative to any project that we are reviewing. We'll really appreciate that. So if we know ahead of time, we will get you those figures, accurate figures. Thank you.
And also, if you have questions and you want to notify me about them, I meet with the planning director the day before each of these meetings, and I make sure that staff is aware of the questions that I know the commission has raised, so that we make sure things are addressed in the meeting. Just in terms of the meeting that we're going to be having on the park, the city council directed originally that we had a sort of joint task force that included Prop J and Parks and the Arts Commission, AAC, Planning Commission, which was to substitute for the park going before all of the bodies. But we did think that since we're at sort of a 50% design, that we wanted to have a review in a study session by the AAC and Planning Commission. Those comments will be shared with the architects and consultants, as well as with the whole commission before the 100% drawings are complete. So packages will come to you. And if you have questions in advance, please share them. We'll try and make sure. It will be Flynn who will be doing the presentation. But if we have your questions in advance, and any of them are questions that only Mr. Rios can answer, he will be able to get through to them to get answers for you. So please take a look at it in advance. I think I have an email that included these plans. What I can do is get it to Edward, and possibly he can send it out to everybody so that you don't have to wait till next week. Yes?
I have a question for Mr. Robertson. Apparently at the last city council meeting, there were 3 aspects or elements of the central business district discussion that we had they wanted to send back to us. One about the kennel, something about drive-throughs, and there was a third item. What is the process?
Third item was tattoo parlors.
Tattoo parlors.
And tattoo parlors, correct.
What is the process for those coming back to us, and how would we address those?
I will admit that I do not have sufficient information regarding that question, but it is.
I asked Flynn. He's going to bring it back at the next meeting in a more formal fashion.
Okay.
And they didn't take action on those. They just had questions, and they wanted us to further elaborate on the reasons we recommended either including or not including those items in.
So did they vote on the remainder of the?
I believe they did.
They acted on the remainder of.
So those they approved, and
Correct.
these 3 they just are pulled out to have further discussion on our part.
Yes.
And
And
then we'll go back before them
there were no, from what I understand from one of the city council members, they had questions because they got the 2 letters we did on the kennel. They wanted to more fully understand our reasons, and there was at least 1 or 2 or 2 city councilors on each of the other items that thought possibly we should allow drive-throughs or tattoo parlors. I don't think it was unanimous, but there were some people who thought that tattoo parlors were hip now as.
I've been hip for 30 years, but that's okay.
Yeah.
You might as well address it now.
So that will be coming back to us.
Oh, Peter.
So did I answer your question, or you want me to have it? Okay, thank you.
I think with that, anything else from anyone else? I'm adjourning this meeting until 10:30 on Wednesday, the 27th of June, at the convention center. Is it 10:30 or 11? I'm sorry, Edward. It's at 11. 11 o'clock. You can come early if you want to.
Yes. Uh-huh.
It'll start at 1:30. It'll also be at the convention center. And I don't know if it will include lunch, but maybe we can otherwise try
Apparently,
one
it
of
does
the new
include
restaurants.
lunch. She told me
Wait
earlier.
a minute. You had a question regarding lunch, right? I think that Ms. Haynes can answer that. Will there be lunch provided on that day?
Will there be as part of the study session, will there be public comment on the park plan?
There will be the possibility, the openness for public comment, yes.
There could be a lot of people then.
Yes. But actually, it probably should have been earlier. It could take time.
Well, I can discuss that with Flynn and
Would
we'll
you
send
discuss that?
message.
If we have public comment,
Correct.
we might not have time to go through the entire presentation for a group that hasn't been sitting in on all of the meetings.
Okay, we'll handle that.
Thank you.
Thank you.